All right. So it's 4 o'clock. So let's get started. Just talking to the gentleman here. He said you're in a tough spot right now, and I told him, yeah, happy hour's probably already started, so you may not have a full class today, but whatever the case may be, we'll still push through and see if we can get through this presentation and learn something along the way. Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Shannon Lightfoot. I'm Virtual Design and Construction Manager for McCarthy Building Companies, and we're a general contractor based out of St. Louis is where our headquarters, but we work all over the country. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about virtual collaboration, and I kind of cheated a little bit. You know, it's only supposed to be talking about virtual mockups and how we utilize virtual mockups, but I snuck some other information in here about how we utilize SketchUp throughout the construction phase and in what areas that you guys may be interested in. So I'm going to highlight those a little bit as well. And throughout the presentation, feel free to ask questions as they come up. I want this to be a little more engaging and conversational than more presentation. But we've got some good stuff here, and hopefully you guys will learn a lot. This is actually my first SketchUp Basecamp. So I'm actually a newbie, and when I looked around, I went to a few courses today and earlier today, and realized that I am very overdressed. So I apologize. I should have wore flip-flops and shorts, but whatever the case may be, we'll keep going here. So, are there any other new beginner Basecamp folks here? Anybody for the first time? Perfect. Okay. And as far as like SketchUp users, how many beginners do we have? Beginner users? Okay, 1. Everybody else kind of intermediate, advanced, a little bit. Okay, cool. So we'll. I won't spend too much time on some of the basic components, but we'll definitely highlight some of the things that we've seen throughout using SketchUp and the way that we typically integrate SketchUp into our workflow. So again, I work for a general contractor, so we work with our design partners a lot during pre-construction phases of the project. So once a project is designed, we typically are engaged with the design partners and the owner to look at that project in a number of different ways. And a lot of those ways, it will help us to be able to construct or build that project. So you'll see a lot of themes throughout the presentation about how we bring these design intents and these design models to a constructible state so that we can actually build it with our trade partners. And here's a little bit about the agenda. Again, I talked a little bit about the ways that we utilize SketchUp in construction. So we will talk a little bit about construction logistics plan. So what does that mean? What is a construction logistics plan? What does that look like? What does that do for our project team? What does that do for our client and the messaging that we have on the project? I'm going to highlight a little bit about 3D printing. Now 3D printing is something that we did starting probably about 5 years ago, but has really ramped up in all of our different offices and divisions. And we'll show you how we utilize SketchUp to enhance our 3D printing workflow and kind of what that looks like on our projects. The next item will highlight pretty much our main focus of the presentation, which is exterior mockups. So virtual building enclosure mockups, and we'll talk a little bit about the physical mockups that we build and then how that virtual component actually plays into us really planning and making decisions early about the building details. And then we'll finish off with the interior mockup. So some of the cooler things that we're implementing with rooms and spaces, operating rooms, whether it be classrooms or labs, and how we utilize SketchUp to enhance and understand the components about those rooms before we actually build a physical mock-up. So some really good stuff throughout the presentation here. So just a little bit about virtual design and construction. And I don't want to assume that anybody knows any of the way we understand virtual design and construction, what VDC is, what BIM is. But the way we look at virtual design and construction is a way for us to integrate models in the way we do business. So typically in construction, we're probably the industry that is behind on technology, the most out of the majority of the industries, but we are starting to be more receptive to the technology. Again, the reason being because our design partners and our clients are utilizing this technology to enhance the way they deliver projects, to enhance the way our designers design the projects and bring them to fruition for our clients. And really, it's our job to get on board with that technology so that we can communicate effectively with our design partners and collaborate in a way that will bring more value to the client and their project. And this picture is just a picture of one of our superintendents who's utilizing an iPad out in the field with one of our SketchUp models just to look at certain components in the building and enhance the way that he looks at and reviews the projects. And one of the things that we are doing here at McCarthy is enabling our workforce to own some of these processes. So while we have experts like myself in each of our offices and engineers that create these models for different reasons, we also like to enable our workforce, which is our superintendents, our engineers, our managers, to put the tools into their hands so that when they're working with our trade partners and owners, they can speak the language just as effectively as we can on the project, which brings a lot of credibility to how we utilize that technology in the most efficient way. Just do a little engagement here, just by a show of hands, or if somebody wants to raise their hand, I'd appreciate it. But as far as virtual design and construction, what are some of the words that come to mind for you guys when you think about BIM or virtual design or construction? What are some of the things that you guys think of that value-added words that may come to mind during that time when you hear virtual design and construction? What are some of the words?
Lack of compatibility.
Compatibility? Lack of compatibility. Okay. What about things that when you hear virtual design and construction that you may say, okay, this is one of the words I would use in order to show value to that virtual design and construction. Conflicts. Okay. Resolution. Conflict resolution. Collaboration. Okay. Okay. Eliminating waste. That's a good one. Pre-planning. Yep. Yep. Definitely. All those things are exactly what we look at and what we see in the virtual design and construction process. So just showing some of our core values centered around VDC. Efficiency. So being able to understand how quickly we can get from point A to point B without waste and without taking too much time to get from point A to point B. Effective. How effective are the tools that we're using? How effective is SketchUp in this specific process? How effective are the other tools that we use in different processes? Is it of quality? Quality is one thing that we look at throughout the entire construction process, and we want to be at the highest quality. So we build virtually before we build physically so that quality is there throughout the process. Productivity, again, being more efficient, being able to get from point A to point B as efficiently as possible with the least amount of waste. And then clarity. And you'll see clarity throughout this presentation. And the reason we look at clarity is because we want our clients and our design partners to look at these projects in the same light that we do. We don't want people to be confused about, well, how big is this room? What's the space look like? I can't tell from the 2D drawings, what this looks like and how we're going to interact in this space. And we take those models that we get from our design partners and we enhance them and we create these virtual mock-ups that allow our design partners to then get real clarity about what their building is going to look like. So with that, we're going to go into a little bit about SketchUp and construction. Again, we're going to highlight a couple of the things that we use. This is not everything that we use SketchUp for, but we are starting to use it for a lot more things, and we'll definitely highlight that as we go through. So I've actually have been a SketchUp user for about 10 years now. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in architectural engineering and really learned SketchUp when I started with my current company, and we were using it in limited space back then. We were modeling some specific details and communicating with our design partners and writing RFIs, but we really started to expand that over the years and really get into some really more advanced type workflows in construction. So the first area is construction logistics plans. Does everybody know what a logistics plan is at a high level? Okay, it's just basically a way that we communicate where all the items on a project site are going to be, especially when you think about campuses. So an owner may have a hospital campus where he has multiple buildings and multiple areas, and we have a new site that is going right in the middle of that campus. So they need to know where our job site fencing is going to be. They need to know how our patients and our folks that are coming to the existing hospital, how are they going to still maintain access to the hospital while we're working there? What is our cranes? What are our cranes going to look like? Where are they going to be placed? Is that going to be the efficient area that we're going to be able to place those in? And then where's our laydown? Where's our job site trailers? Where are those things? How are we going to access the site? So we use these construction logistics plans using SketchUp to communicate that effectively to our clients. And one of the main features that I definitely like to use in those logistics plans is photo match. Has everybody used photo match before? Definitely an effective tool for construction logistics plans. So I'll open up a model here and just kind of show you what that looks like. So here's an example of a logistics plan and this is obviously already teed up. Just to kind of highlight some of the advantages of SketchUp. So I'll rotate around and kind of show you what that logistics plan looks like. Most of the models and components that we use are taken from, we do utilize the 3D warehouse for a lot of these models because they're very basic, they're very generic, but they convey a message that allows us to create these plans a lot more effectively. Obviously, there's some textures here to make it look like an actual job site, and other components that give us the ability to kind of communicate how we're going to plan for that specific job. So if I come over here to my system tray, you'll see a photo match icon here, and this is where typically your photo match is. So let me go back to my scene, and I'm going to hit edit. And right now you can't see a photo, and it's because I know why. Here, let me hit done. I'm going to go to my style. So within photo match, you can actually turn off the background photo, and that's what I've done here. Because there's a number of ways we would go about this. So once we would get our construction logistics plan, we would turn off the background photo and export just the model with the transparent background. So if I turn back that photo on, you can kind of see here. So this is just an aerial photo that we've taken from Google Earth, or we've shot with a drone or some other method of taking the aerial photo. And we have matched that perspective with the model that we have in SketchUp. Again, you can toggle on and toggle off that background photo here in styles, or you can kind of mess with the transparency if you need to at least see that photo, but in perspective with your model. So going back to the photo match. So this icon here looks like two little gears. It's your edit photo match. Once I click that, I can then see my green and red lines, which match up with my axis. So this is a way for us, again, to match up the construction model with the actual photo without knowing, what was my elevation, what was my angle, where was the camera. We don't know any of those parameters sometimes. So being able to utilize photo match is definitely a way for us to convey that construction logistics plan without having to really model up all these existing buildings. Again, this is a campus for a client we have in Texas right now, and we're building a new outpatient center here, kind of like where this existing parking lot is. So what we did was we we utilize the building corner, an existing building corner, and utilize the green and red axes. As you can see here, you can kind of move those and see how that affects your model alignment. We took dimensions from different various sources to determine the height of the building. And then what we can do is we can line up that axis here with a building corner and make sure that that blue axis is lined up with the wall. And take some different dimensions and understand how big that building is to get the same scale of our model with that picture. So again, if I rotate out, I hit done here, and I rotate out, you can see that that image is gone. But as I go back to it, it comes right back into place where I've created that photo match. So again, this is just one way that we utilize logistics plans with photos to get a quick turnaround and communicate where our logistics layout is going to be, crane location, things like that. And then we can take this to another platform and start putting tags in and things like that so that we can be real clear on how we're going to address that on the project once we get to that point. We do occasionally build full-on models where we will build all the surrounding buildings. And we only get into that when we typically go and produce animations and different things like that for our clients. So any questions on photo match or the construction logistics plans? Get one.
So the background you're using on the construction model is from the drone imagery, or is that something else?
Yeah, this is from, so it's actually here at the bottom, it's from Nearmap. So we have a subscription with Nearmap who update their aerial imagery a lot more frequently than like a Google Earth. So typically most people will go to Google Earth or Google Earth Pro and export those images. We utilize Nearmap because they update their pictures a lot more effectively. We have a subscription with them.
The imagery you use for your model itself within the cement slab, is that something someone did in Photoshop, or is that something that you chose from another site?
Yeah, so that's a technique we use. We get our textures from everywhere, and I think Substance Source is one of the latest places we've gone and utilized textures from to bring into our models. Some of this is of another site, maybe some big quarry or big field, and you kind of captured that and brought it onto a site. So we utilize some of those techniques, some of those the little tricks to make it look like it's not as tileable. You know what I mean? Sometimes you get into a situation where you hit a texture and you stretch it out as big as you can for this site, and it doesn't look as real. You know what I mean? It's not as convincing. So we utilize some of those techniques to help with textures that big.
So would there have been parking under or buildings under when you laid down your textures?
Say that again?
Underneath your, what do you call it? Wherever you got the picture, the pictures for that, underneath the real photograph, were there buildings there that you're dropping this on?
No, there's just a parking lot. So here, I'll hide. Let's do this.
There you go.
Yep. So I'll hide, and that's the picture right there. So it's over an existing parking lot. So just based on where we know that job site fencing is going to go and the way we match the photo, we're able to basically, once you match it, you can actually draw over the photo and it'll follow those lines exactly where they are. So that's the beauty of kind of doing something like this, where you don't have to model everything around it. You just model the new stuff and overlay it right on top of the photo. But very, very good, cool technique, but good question. Very good question. Any more on logistics plans? There'll be time later if you guys think of something in the meantime. So a couple other things I wanted to mention. When we get into these logistics plans, a lot of times we want to match up the shadows. So some of the plugins that I found that were pretty helpful in matching up the photo with your SketchUp model is Solar. It's called Solar North. I think it's a free plugin on the extension warehouse. But Solar North allows you to actually change the native SketchUp sun angle without having to like rotate your model. So basically, if your model is already positioned in the way that you want it, and you don't want to have to try to rotate it to the correct angle it is in the real world, you can use Solar North, and it comes with this little icon where you can place it on a flat surface and then just tell it what angle that true north is, and it'll rotate the sun and shadows accordingly to where that is. So pretty helpful plug-in to kind of manipulate your shadows. Instant Road is another one by Valley Architects. We use that for parking and striping and things like that for logistics plans. So pretty good plugins for utilizing for logistics plans. So let's get back into it a little bit. Here's another existing photo. So this was actually from Google Earth. Right now Google Earth kind of provides us with sort of like a photogrammetry model if you enable the terrain. So we've actually utilized that in some instances to show a little bit more of a 3D perspective if we don't have an aerial image. And what we do is we use the same techniques that we would with a photo over the 3D model. So sometimes you'll get into a situation where Google Earth, the 3D mesh, is more updated than the actual 2D photo. So sometimes we have to go back and forth between the two to really understand what's the most updated one, so that we can kind of minimize work and then show the actual new logistics plan.
How are you getting the mesh out of Google and into?
So this is still a photo. This is still a photo. Yep. So the same photo mesh techniques we utilize on the 2D aerial photo. We utilize the same way out of Google Earth Pro, just taking a snapshot. There are some tricks that we have found with Google Earth Pro where you can export the mesh. It's not like a plug-in. It's just a different way of thinking about exporting that mesh. So just as you would a drone, as you would take photos with a drone, you do the same thing inside of Google Earth. So if you record a tour, just like you would if you were capturing it from a drone, you can actually export that to like a recap photo and recreate this mesh. Now it's not as clean, but if you need things that are far away, you can actually capture that, and I think you can export it to like an FBX with all the textures and everything. So if you have a really good model inside of Google Earth and you create that tour and export all those photos, you can send it to like Recap or some other program that processes those photos to create that mesh and bring it into your model. So we have done that before, but the results kind of vary, and sometimes it's not as clean. So depending on the deliverable, we may not use that. But that's a good question, though. Okay, so again, once we get to a point where we are good with our logistics plans, we'll utilize a combination of layout, Photoshop to kind of clean up the images and put some labels to them so that we can kind of understand what our logistics plan looks like. Okay, 3D printing. So who in here is doing 3D printing? Is anybody doing 3D printing? Okay, for different reasons. So 3D printing is something that we started to do, I would say probably about 8 years ago. We got into it probably maybe too early. We bought some really expensive equipment at the time that's now like 5% of the value. It's way cheaper now to print than it used to be when 3D printing was not as big. But we utilize 3D printing when we want to engage with our clients on a very high level. So just like you see this image here, this is of a new hospital and parking garages that we were going after, and it was on an existing campus. And we wanted to kind of show the overall campus and their existing surrounding buildings and how that building was going to look. So just think about some of the architectural models that get built, the foam or foam core models that a lot of architects have in their offices. This is very similar to that. But we print them in 3D in a plastic material and put them onto boards so that we can engage with our clients about what their building is going to look like. This has been great for the clients because they love it for their fundraising. They can put it into their office and talk about fundraising with different stakeholders, and during different events they'll showcase these models. So definitely been good as far as our connection with our clients during different stages of the project. But The thing about SketchUp that's good as far as 3D printing is its ease of use. So if you think about the way that SketchUp can allow you to conceptually model things very quickly, that's kind of the reason why we utilize SketchUp for that. I know a lot of people probably use different programs, but SketchUp has been a good way for us to really get a quick turnaround on these 3D printed models. A lot of times we'll bring those from Revit, or if we have a DWG file, we'll bring them in. But we can create these from scratch inside of SketchUp. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight is the STL exporter. I think there's a ton of them out there, but we utilize one called SketchUp STL by the SketchUp team to export these to an STL format. So an STL format is the format it has to be in order to go to a 3D printer. So it's a format that doesn't have any textures, and it's optimized in order to go to a 3D printer and get printed out. Another important plugin, and I think somebody mentioned this in an earlier class, but another important plugin is called Solid Inspector. So when you create these models for 3D printing, they have to be solids. And there's actually a way to kind of tell if they're solids. And let me see if I'm actually go to this previous model and show you an example of, let me see. Let's just go to this one. So this is a model of an airport tug cart that I just got here. But I'm going to show you kind of how you can determine if something is a solid or not. And let's just draw a box, because that'll obviously be a solid. Let's make that a group. So if you click on an object or a group or a component, if you go here to the entity info window, it has a volume. So that's a telltale sign that this object is actually a solid, and it doesn't have any abstract or stray edges or faces or anything like that. And let me see if I can show you. See now I click on the cab, there's no volume, which means that there's probably internal faces and lines and things like that. So it's probably going to be hard to print this out just like this. You'd probably have to do some work in getting that to a solid so that it goes to a 3D printer and doesn't have any issues with printing. So, and with that plugin, Solid Inspector, it'll show you all of those different areas that you may have issues before going to the printer. So it'll actually highlight areas in your model so that you can clean those models up. For more effective 3D printing, and so that you don't have any issues. I think that's it for 3D printing. So here's an example of that. That's that same model here in SketchUp. Let me go back to presenter mode. So that's the same model here in SketchUp that we created for that campus model, and this is the resulting 3D print. This took a few days to print out. These models aren't huge. I think the white building there is probably about 5 by 5. So the overall campus board, I think, was like a 36 by 24 board. But definitely, ways that, our design partners have been doing this for years and creating these, miniature models. And we're starting to get on board with how that helps communicate certain things to our clients and allows them to really communicate and bring clarity to what their projects are going to look like on campus. So definitely an effective way of us using SketchUp and 3D printing to deliver a product to our clients. Any questions about 3D printing while we're on it? Or SketchUp? Okay. So these are just some of the machines that we use. We have Ultimakers and different brands of our 3D printers throughout McCarthy, but I think Ultimaker is probably one of the more widely used printers out in the industry right now. So we're utilizing those as well as some other ones.
I did think of a question that goes.
Yep.
Don't you have to have your surfaces facing a certain way when you send the model?
Yes, that is a very good statement that you just made. So reverse faces is a really bad thing in 3D printing, and I will give you an example of that while we're talking about it. I think everybody knows what reverse faces is, and I don't want to assume everybody does, but take this model, for example. If I right-click on it and hit reverse faces, that, I guess that purple face that you get on the backside of your surfaces, that's the negative side of a face. And if you have those exposed, and what I mean by exposed, I mean to the outside of the model, your 3D printer will look at it and think that there is no face there. So you actually have to reverse all of those faces so that they're facing on the inside of the model. It's just something that's innate to 3D printing and the STL format. So if you do have models that you have reverse faces like this, you definitely have to reverse them so that they face inside the model and won't affect the printing.
Does it solve Inspector catch that, or just for?
Yeah, I believe so. I think there's a Solid Inspector 1 and 2, so I think the newer one may catch that, or maybe the original one does. But there are some plugins that just do that. There's some styles that you can use as well. If you customize some of those styles, that they'll show you, they'll come up in red as reverse faces, and everything else will stay in white that's not reversed, so you can clearly kind of see it. So there's some ways to kind of show where those reverse faces are, especially if you have a really complex model. But that's a good statement there.
Quick question, just out of curiosity,
Mhm.
on that product you showed us, how many McCarthy VDC you guys worked on that one?
So I'll go back to it. So the 3D print proposal. So we had, that was a pretty big one, and it was for a client for a very large project. So we probably had a team of about 5 to 6 people. Not everybody was concentrating on the 3D printing. Some folks were modeling, other folks were doing other things for the project. But the thing about 3D printing is that it's very slow. So you need to allow yourself enough time, just thinking about the size of the model that you want to print out. Just allow yourself enough time in order to print those models out, because some of these can take days to print out. It's a very slow process. It's very rewarding after the fact because you get a really nice model, but it's very slow right now, and that's just where the technology is. Maybe in the future they'll get a little bit faster. We'll be able to print these models out a little bit quicker. They're not hollow. So there's a couple of settings you can use for 3D printed models where you can hollow. So the best practice, if you know you're strapped for time, the best thing to do is model it in a way that you don't have it printing out anything in the middle. So basically what you would have in this building right here is you would have thin walls, and then you would have the roof that's very thin, and you would just have the exterior elements that have the detail. That way it'll print in a much shorter time than having a solid block and it having to print all of the inside of that model. So really depends on what you're going for, what your goal is. But there are some time efficiency savers here.
You said that these are solid?
These are solid. So there's also a way to there's an option to not print it as solid. It's more of like a waffle cone almost inside. So it's like it's structurally sound in order to keep it together, but it's not completely solid while it's doing every pass inside of the model. So a couple of good points. All right. So let's dig into some of the exterior mock-ups. So when we talk about exterior mock-ups, we are really talking about building enclosure. So all of the contractors in here, and even our architects and design partners, know what I'm talking about when I talk about the building envelope or building enclosure. So virtual mock-ups is a method that we use in order to really understand the specific details about a building. A physical mock-up is something that contractors build on the job site in order to get all the trades on board to understand some of the intricacies about the building enclosure. So where is the waterproofing? Where is the tie vac? What type of material is this that needs to be sprayed over the sheathing? How does the masonry and the ties connect to this specific element on the building? So all of those different things have to be thought of up front before we actually put anything into place on the building. And our design partners do a great job of creating a sketch or a model or a concept of what this mock-up should look like. Some of the challenges come when we get different details and we start to put them together into a model of our own, along with the building enclosure details, which may sometimes just be a standard detail, which is fine. But then you start getting into the specifications about what actually has to go into the building, and then you get into more detail about the trade-specific submittals. So that information is usually not known early enough for our design partners to know how these mock-ups should go together. So, a lot of times their role is to give us a good conceptual design model intent mock-up so that we know exactly what we're going to build once we get our trade partners on board, once we understand who our curtain wall subcontractor is going to be, who our mason is going to be, who the waterproofers are going to be. Once we get all of their information about exactly what they're going to build on the project, we will integrate that into a virtual building enclosure mock-up. So a couple of components that are usually not known early enough for our design partners are, the structural steel. How are we going to brace this mock-up once we build it? Do we need to add structural steel? Typically we do, because sometimes these mock-ups are 10 feet, 12 feet. Sometimes they're 20 foot wide. And a lot of times they only have one or two walls. So we need to be able to brace that. And basically what's shown in this animation is a combination of our design intent, basically how that mock-up is going to look, as well as some of the specific details that we get from the drawing. So being able to put together a 2D section of exactly what this detail shows in a 3D format. Sometimes we can find constructability issues with that once we put all those details together in a 3D format. So this process allows us to minimize those constructability issues before we even build it. We typically will get on board our consultants. They will review some of these details and this mock-up along with our subcontractors to really figure out what the best approach is if we do run into a conflict. We'll use these models in pre-installation meetings, so before our subcontractors actually go build it on the project, we'll utilize these models to get everything exactly right before they go build it. So it's almost like the measure twice, cut once theory. Scope gaps is something else sometimes we identify. Again, I just talked about the structural steel. Who's going to provide the structural steel to actually brace this? Sometimes that's not known. So we'll model that in, just like we did for this example. Another thing I'm going to show on the next slide is a little bit more about installation sequence verification. So a lot of times we'll have really complex details where you don't know who should go first. Should the waterproofer go first here? Should the mason go? Who goes in what order? And a lot of times that's not known, and that's not really a job of our subcontractors, but us as the designers and the contractors to figure out who should go and when. And a lot of times we'll put together a drawing or a sheet that allows our subcontractors to know who goes in what sequence. You got a question?
Yeah, and you would control the modeling because your subcontractors, for example, may not know how to do SketchUp or whatever.
Correct.
So then they would submit their data to you in whichever format.
Right.
And you control the model.
That's correct. So we typically control this process. Now, it's always a good thing if our subcontractors do know how to model, or if they can provide a model. Maybe they're using CAD, maybe they're using Revit. Maybe they have already modeled their scope of work. A lot of times our masons aren't modeling, but if we do have a metal panel or curtain wall subcontractor, or even structural steel, we'll say, hey, send us your model so that then we can then integrate it in the SketchUp via, DWG import or whatever format that's compatible with SketchUp. We'll integrate that with the mock-up, and that will get us, that much further ahead so that we can start putting more of the details in order.
Does the model become part of the contract?
The model does not become part of the contract. We still have to rely on the contract documents that come from our design partners, but this is a supplement to that. So they can always rely on that contract document to utilize, but they utilize also the drawings that we put together and show those lessons learned as far as like the sequence of who goes first and who goes next. Mm-hmm.
So even with a constructive mock-up this detail, which is awesome,
are you still gonna build a physical mock-up of
Yes.
this same wall?
That's a good point. So we still have to build it physically, and that's the last point. Build virtually before you build it physically. So, and that's one thing that we always keep top of mind, is that we want to build it virtually so that we work out all these constructability issues, and we're not wasting those dollar signs down there, because just like other things that we build on site, they cost money. These materials cost money, and depending on how big these mock-ups are, they can go into the tens of thousands and maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars for all the components that get put together. So we don't want to have to build this multiple times, because that's definitely a waste of money. So we still have to build a physical mock-up, because we have to test it for air and water infiltration, make sure that the waterproofing is exactly how it should be, so that no air or water leaks into the building. So we still have to do all that testing of the mock-up to make sure the window systems and panels and things like that are doing the job that they're doing and keeping the water and air out. So this allows us to get past the issues that we typically have between dissimilar materials. So a metal panel coming into a wall, what does that waterproofing look like? This allows us to flesh out those issues, and then we can go test it to kind of do that final verification.
And then total number of man hours spent to create this animation, rough guess.
Rough guess, I would say probably about maybe 100 man hours. So these get pretty detailed, and that's going back between meetings with your superintendent, understanding what this detail looks like from a designer, maybe submit an RFI, getting a response. Your consultant has comments, coming back and doing some updates, creating this animation, doing the sequence according to how we think we're gonna put it in place, then coming back and figuring out how we're actually gonna put it in place, and what's that best sequence to facilitate a more productive job site. So this is definitely not a quick turnaround process. This is something that takes a little time up front, but provides a lot of benefit once we get a final product that we can then use on down the line for all the details. I think you had a question.
VDC guy on site, or does McCarthy usually have it in the office and then they go to the job that requires VDC, or is there a VDC person on the job site?
Yep. So.
That would handle it from cradle to grave.
Yeah, so a lot of times what will happen with the mock-ups is that a VDC subject matter expert will take that on from either the office. Typically, we don't have a VDC person on site, but just like I mentioned earlier, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll take a project engineer that may have some understanding of how to use SketchUp, and we will show them the different things that they need to know in order to build this mock-up, so that they can then use it on the job site throughout the life of the job. So to answer your question, typically it's coming from a VDC person who already knows SketchUp, so it's easy for us to kind of pick up those drawings and create something, at least something that's a draft right off the bat. And then if they want to kind of engage and kind of move things around and resize things and add details, then our project folks can do that at that time, but we've given them a pretty good start. But it's definitely something that's used on the job site. Yep.
Wouldn't your design consultants be shamed to death? They should have done?
They actually love this. I mean, even our building closure consultants, because it gives it such clarity that before we didn't have. So it's not we're not stepping on toes. We're not pointing fingers. It's just a way for us to collaborate. And I think that's the beauty of utilizing something like this, is because our design partners are used to those models. They're used to producing those models and producing those drawings from the model. And once we can get on a common platform like SketchUp to create this enhanced version, because again, they don't know some of the things that we're going to do to the mock-up, when they design it. So in order for us to really collaborate, we bring the construction perspective of how it's going to be built and the design intent, and we bring those together in a collaborative way that allows us to get to a deliverable like this. So it's definitely something that has been well received, and from the projects that I've worked on, I haven't any comments that someone didn't like it or thought that they were stepping on anybody's toes. Yeah, I don't know about that. I wouldn't say we're doing that work. We're not designers, but we're able to help kind of enhance this process a lot more than we have in previous years when we didn't have these types of tools. So definitely a good thing. Question?
I'm a designer.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so typically we would get a model like a Revit model, and a lot of times they'll create them in Revit, and that will give us an idea of the window sizes, how thick the wall is, maybe even the material on the wall. A lot of that we can get from the actual drawing, so we'll get a mock-up drawing. But a good start is if our design partners will give us a model. Typically, we would have to break that model apart anyway to put some more detail in it. So we probably use about maybe 20% of that model, and then we start adding the different layers and details according to the contract documents on top of that. But it's a good start. It's definitely a good start and gets us further ahead, closer to the. Thanks. Any other questions? So again, lessons learned manual. So once we've created that virtual mock-up that we're able to use in our pre-installed meetings and with our design partners, we typically create a lessons learned manual. And what that does is that allows us to continue to utilize what we've learned in those build enclosure meetings and take that out to the field. So again, the integrated work plan that our subcontractors can use to figure out who goes first, who goes next, and what's that sequence of installation. And we typically use layout for something like this that shows the different steps and different screenshots from SketchUp. So that's a direct export from SketchUp to layout, and then we can start putting text and different things to it so that they can understand what that workflow looks like. Do we have any people that use layout, SketchUp and layout together? Okay, no, probably most of our designers. Okay. And same thing I just talked about, integrated work plan. So this is a example of one of our mock-ups where we were taking dimensions of the actual concrete. So typically we'll just, on the drawings, we'll just get like a slab that we may need to pour for the mock-up. But according to the details, there may be a brick shelf or a step in the slab that we need to account for. So we'll actually create what we call a concrete lift drawing for that specific slab so that we can pour it according to what those details look like. And also add support steel. Some details have, brick lintels or relief lintels for the masonry that may go above the window or below the window, or below a cast stone piece that goes on the mock-up. So again, we have to account for all that steel and other information in the mock-up as well before we even put those specific details on it. And again, using layout to kind of facilitate that and dimension that and really share that with our crew out in the field. Any questions about exterior mock-ups? That was kind of going a little bit more into our pre-construction before we get to the actual building, understanding the details, the little nuances about the building enclosure, and really that's more the tie between construction and design. What we're going to get into now is a little bit more about interior mock-ups. So this is something that we do much earlier in the process. So interior mock-ups consist of things like patient rooms. So for healthcare, there are always rooms that the client wants to see what they're going to look like, how they're going to function. When a doctor or a nurse steps into this room, what are they going to? How's their experience going to be? How's the patient experience going to be? We get that question asked a lot, and a lot of times our clients may not be able to understand that from a 2D drawing and even an elevation. So we typically will integrate that interior mock-up process early enough in the design phase that we can affect where things go in the actual building. So whenever we can be on board very early in the design phase, depending on the delivery method, and we may be able to affect that design, this is where this is most valuable. So we utilize SketchUp again for the interior mock-ups. This is actually a SketchUp model here for a previous project that we did. But again, the SketchUp is a common collaboration platform. So a lot of times for these conceptual models, our design partners will utilize SketchUp to put together these buildings, maybe even before they get into Revit. And then we can utilize SketchUps to add specific details. So what are the instruments that are going to be on the wall? What's the furniture look like? Maybe some of that is not even known yet, and our design partners haven't included it. We can put those generic models, some of them even specific models, on the specific type of bed, the specific type of casework, the instruments, the things like that typically may get moved around during the design process. Maybe it's on this wall. Maybe it's a head wall that projects out from the wall. Maybe the size of it changes. Maybe the height of it changes because that's the average height of where they reach for those controls. So streamlining that design validation process is really the value that this process brings early in the process. I talked about head wall instrument coordination. I think that's one of the most impactful things about some of these interior mock-ups is that they can get to a point where, and I'll show you later in VR, where they're moving around those instruments on the wall in VR. So they can say, you know what, this is too high, we need to move it down here. Or, hey, this shouldn't be on this wall, this should be on this wall. And they can actually move those inside of VR and it actually update in the SketchUp model. So we'll show some of those examples here in a minute. But here's a photo of one of our doctors at one of our healthcare clients' campuses in I think this is one of the warehouse rooms or just an open room, but we set up an HTC Vive with one of their patient rooms, and we asked our doctor to basically step into the room, step into that environment, and engage with us and give us some feedback about what you think about the layout of this room and how the things are flowing and what you would experience if you were in this room physically. And again, that has, I think, allowed us to engage more with our client and get feedback early enough so that we can affect the design, or at least communicate that feedback back to our design partners and really affect how their building is going to be laid out once they get it. Because once it's built, I mean, that's it. They have it. You know what I mean? So we want them to be able to give us feedback and influence what that building is going to look like and what that layout is going to look like. Yep, so I'm getting ready to jump into that right now. You're one slide ahead of me. That's okay though. So here, let's jump into Inkscape. Well, let's jump into SketchUp, I should say, and kind of show you that model. So again, nothing too complex about this model. Nothing really special that we've used that is not native to SketchUp. A lot of these models we've built from the plans that we had. A lot of times what we'll do is if there's a conceptual model, a Revit model, maybe a design development level model that we can get from our design partners, we'll bring that into SketchUp, and then we'll start adding some of these things that may not be included. Maybe there's a TV on the wall here. Maybe there's the bed here that may be a patient bed. Maybe there's a computer on the wall. Maybe there's some casework, different things like that. And here's one of our doctors right here. You're looking at that computer. So we have different resources that we use. A lot of these come from our library that we've collected over the years. Form Fonts is one of them. I'm trying to think of all the names, and now I'm drawing a blank. But there's a lot of different places that will sell you like a package of models that you can then create and bring into your model. What'd you say? No, this is definitely not a Form Fonts. This is probably a much more advanced model that we probably purchased somewhere along the line and collected in our database of models. But those are the types of places that we typically get these. A lot of these aren't available in the warehouse, so you have to go out and kind of purchase some of these models. And we have done that because a lot of times we'll bring it into more advanced software so that we can render it and see more higher end renders. But it's something that you can also bring into SketchUp. Now, just understand that it may be a little bit more high poly and could bog down your model. But we try to bring a little bit more realism to that model, especially if they're doing sort of VR engagement in the model. So let's show you a little bit of the Inkscape workflow and the reason that we kind of like Inkscape and the reason why we use that for VR. So Inkscape is a plugin. It's a plugin into Revit, and we also utilize it inside of SketchUp, just because of the way we can model in SketchUp. So if you go to your extensions, it's here under Inkscape, and you can hit the Start button. There's also some settings and other things that you can tweak before you drill into Inkscape, but if you hit that Start Inkscape button, you'll see a progress bar that starts to generate some information about how it's loading the project and different things like that. So starting to generate that. So here's your Inkscape window. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these side by side so you can kind of see that real-time updating, if you will. And I think that's the beauty of Inkscape, is that it's a real-time rendering engine that allows you to see that same SketchUp model that may be monochromatic or maybe very conceptual, but seeing it in more of a rendered 3D type of environment, like you will here. Now, I don't have a 3D mouse, but we'll try to make it through just with the regular mouse. So one of the things that I do like about Inkscape is the ability to change materials on the fly. So one of the things that Inkscape has innate to it is the ability to change materials even with the type of material that it has from SketchUp. So let's just put the eyedropper on this window just to see what that material is. So that material it's just a color. It says H06. So instead of dragging and dropping materials, a lot of times what you can do is, especially with Inkscape, is if you put glass at the end of that, guess what? It turns to glass. I don't know if you guys saw that, but probably hard to see. So here, let's do it again. I'll hit enter, and you can see how that changed from a matte to a glass. Now, the reason that you can't see through it is because that there's a color. So you still have to tweak your transparency. So we'll go to edit, and once you see this, you'll realize, okay, now I can see why there's, that you can't see through it. So now you have glass that actually has reflections, and you can kind of see that here. It has reflections of the bed and different things like that. So just by putting those little keywords inside of the materials, you can change them to different materials. So if it's shiny, if it's rough, if you have a material and you want to give it that's a flat green, you want to give it grass, you can put those different components in it. So Inkscape allows us to kind of do those real-time texture mapping and changing of materials kind of on the fly. Another good thing, and here I'll rotate around a little bit so you can see this in SketchUp as well as Inkscape, but the tissue box holder, this is the glove box holder. So if we click on it and just use the native tools, you can see it updates automatically in Inkscape. So just think about being able to use this with a client while they're in VR, while they're walking around the space, even if they have no other experience with VR. They don't know how to move things. They don't know how to walk. If you have them actually in that space and you can move those components around for them and they just give you that feedback, that's much more impactful than them looking at 2D drawings trying to figure out what this space is going to feel like just from those 2D drawings. So we've utilized this in most of our healthcare projects early in the process. Again, when we can get engaged early with our design partners and affect some of that design. I know some of our design partners are actually using this as well, some of this virtual reality software, but we typically will take that and definitely get our clients engaged early in the process so that they can give us that feedback and we can get them engaged in the project early enough for us to make changes that will probably cost more money if they were changed later on in the process. And And that's a little bit about Inkscape. Is there any questions about Inkscape? Who's all using Inkscape? Is everybody? There's a few people. Okay, 3. Okay. Again, this is something that you can use inside of SketchUp, so that's the reason I think it's a very, very good plugin. It's not very expensive, but for the value that you get out of it, I think it's definitely well worth it, especially if you want to bring something to more of a virtual reality feel so that they can feel like they're in that space. Question? That's something I haven't really messed with. More of this is for us to put it into VR. You mean like as far as like a rendered image? I'm under the impression that's probably just as good as quality as you can see here. One of the things that that is really good about this, and if you are just say you go and you engage with the client and they actually want this model after you've left, you can actually create an exe file from Inkscape and send that to anybody, and it'll play on their computer. No software needed. It's just an exe file, executable file that they can run from any computer, and they can navigate with the controls from their computer. So that's another good thing that I like about this is that you don't have to have any coding background. You hit an export button, and it packages all the materials, all the things that you've already preset in the model, and you can just email that or send that out on a USB drive to whoever, and they can navigate that model in VR.
When you're doing that though, do they have to have a decent computer graphics card, or is all the rendering already done?
They should have a good computer, but I haven't had an experience where somebody came back and said, I can't see this model. So a lot of that is already built in. It's optimized for sending out remotely to different computers. So you don't necessarily have to have a good computer, but it's probably worth it for like the fast navigating and things like that. You may see some latency and maybe some texture fighting and things like that if you have a very low-end computer. But for the most part, they package it in a way that allows you to do it on a majority of computers, at least nowadays. Yeah.
So what's the workflow? What do you need to do to be able to get your client to be able to walk through there?
Really nothing. I mean, there are controls at the bottom. So in Inkscape, there are default controls, and you can probably change these around depending on what you want to do. But there's you use W on the keyboard to move forward, S to move back, D and A to move right. They can use their mouse to look around with the left mouse control. It's right here, look around. You can orbit with the right mouse control. If you hold Shift with the right mouse control, you can control the time of day with the sun and shading. So it's very straightforward when it comes to being able to put this in somebody's hands and say, hey, here's a model. I want you to look through it and review it, and then look at these controls and actually look at that model without having any prior experience. It does work with VR goggles. So we use Steam VR with our HTC Vive. We don't have an Oculus, but Vive is usually it's pretty comparable to all the VR systems. So it does work with the Vive and with the Oculus. And it looks like I have 1 minute left. So any more questions? Yep.
Are your scenes in SketchUp, how do they link into Inkscape as well? So you're looking at those scenes?
No, I think I set up those scenes for probably hiding some things. Those things don't typically come over. It's just whatever is shown in that SketchUp model at that time is what's going to export to Inkscape. So if you hide the ceiling, it's going to be hidden when you export it. So things like that. So it knows what's in the model right then and there, and it'll export that information for you. Yep.
When you finally get around to a physical mock-up, do you put the real equipment in there?
Yes. So we try to be as close to the real furniture, equipment, whatever is actually going to be installed in the actual building. We gather that information, whether it be from PDFs or manuals or submittals or whatever it is. We want to get that real information so that they have a good representation of what that's actually going to look like. We try not to be too generic with the components.
Do that for the ORs as well? I mean, for everything?
Yep.
Can't you recover the equipment and really build it back in, or do they not allow that?
So that's a good point, and I think that's why we kind of talked about a little bit about price, but those ORs tend to be a little bit more expensive when it comes to mock-up. So we try to get to the most efficient way to build these mock-ups, and that a lot of times that's why they're hundreds of thousands of dollars, some of these mock-ups. So depending on what they want to mock up and what the detail is, a lot of that information we will get from the client and say, how detailed do you want this to be? Do you want the actual bed, or do you just want the size of the bed so that you know where it is? So we can get that feedback from the client before we actually go to that level of detail when purchasing that equipment. A lot of times they do want the actual equipment in there, at least the casework and the instruments on the wall. Maybe not the bed as much, but we'll definitely get a lot of that information up front before we make that next step. But it always goes into the modeling and virtual reality.
That's still Inkscape?
This is actually Unity. So this is a step further than Inkscape, even though Inkscape is pretty comparable. What you can do with Unity, we have some folks on board that are really more advanced in the virtual reality, understanding shadows and different textures and things like that, and movable parts. So we've used Unity, we've used Unreal Engine, and we've used Inkscape, all different ways for virtual reality. So. All right.
Is that the actual bid on that project? Did it come from warehouse?
It didn't come from the SketchUp warehouse. A lot of these different models are not coming from warehouse. We have to go out and purchase them. So whether we're looking online for different vendors that model them, and then we purchase those models from those vendors, we actually have to go find that specific bed or a similar bed of that size.
That's a lot of money.
It is. Yep. But the benefit of that is far outweighs the $100 that we may pay for a model. And then and we get the job, and we can use that bed for different. If it comes up again, we can reuse that for a conceptual model. So while the money is up front, it is a little bit more expensive because it's a lot of our time to model this and put this together as well. But it's well worth it if we, like you said, win the job, or we're able to create something that avoids a cost overrun later on in the project that could be outweigh that the purchase of that little model.
So you built your virtual model for the wall in
Mm-hmm.
the previous presentation.
Yep.
How much of that do you get value in return for the next job? Meaning, you obviously put it in some kind of a library or an archive,
Mm-hmm.
so you can digitally retrieve it.
Right.
But do you actually reuse it?
We may use components of it. So if they don't have a wall mock-up or something like that on the next job is too conceptual, we'll utilize something we've used on a previous project exactly. Something that's not as specific, we'll utilize something that we've used from a previous project and utilize it on that, just so they can get an idea of what that is going to look like.
That's very
Right. Correct. And then once we get to that point, we can change that out once we get to more detailed design. Okay. All right. So thank you. I appreciate it. I'll be around for a few minutes if you guys have more questions.